This material is a part of the Oklahoma Historical Society's Oral History Program, Living Legends Collection. This material was originally recorded on January the 21st, 1972. This material is a speech that was given before the Oklahoma Heritage Association by Mr. E.K. Gaylord. The meeting was held at the Scriven Hotel in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma. The occasion was emceed by Dr. George L. Cross. This material is being re-recorded on November the 18th, 1985 for inclusion in the permanent collections of the Oral History Program by Judith Michener.
Many of you have listened to talks by other old-timers, and it is possible that I shall duplicate some of the stories you already have heard. I hope to tell you some things you have not heard. On my arrival here in December 1902, the last house north was considered to be the Dewey Cottage at 12th and Hudson. Classen had marked off all the blocks from 13th Street north to 16th as a Bonton residential district, but it was all planted in wheat, although trees had been set out along the front of the lots. The only house under construction was the Overholser mansion. The foundation was in, and the walls just beginning to rise. The last house west on Main Street was in the 900 block. A blackjack grove of trees was on East 10th Street, the north of East 10th Street, east of the Santa Fe, covered a large acreage. I think a few of those blackjacks still are standing in some east side lots and one or two in the sidewalks. Oklahoma City was a typical western frontier cow town. The block on Broadway between Grand Avenue and Main Street, opposite where the Huckins Hotel was later built, was known as Battle Row. Every building but one was either a gambling house or a saloon. The one exception was the Saddle Rock restaurant, where you could get a ham sandwich and a cup of coffee for 15 cents. In January 1903, when I became a permanent resident, I obtained room and board in a house on 3rd Street, where the 16-story Southwestern Bell telephone is now located. I paid $4 per week for 21 meals and my room. Figuring the meals at 15 cents, the 21 meals would be $3.15, leaving 85 cents a week for room rent. The meals were adequate, and the room was comfortable for me and a roommate. Like all pioneer settlements, Oklahoma City was a man's town, and it was estimated that there were 3 men to 1 woman in the city. Everybody was young, and it was claimed that there was only 1 merchant on Main Street over 30 years of age. This was a slight exaggeration, but the city was almost devoid of old people. Zack Mulhall, who founded the town of Mulhall north of Guthrie on his ranch, had 2 daughters. Bossy Mulhall was a cowgirl in Buffalo Bill's show, and she had been publicized quite a bit because of her performance in that show. Her younger sister, Lucille Mulhall, was in Oklahoma City one day and rode her horse over a high curb into 2 John's saloon in Battle Row and ordered a whiskey straight without getting out of the saddle. The bartender and several customers were quite agitated, but the horse and Lucille were unconcerned and turned around and went out as if it was a daily occurrence. All the railroads were running monthly excursions called homesickers excursions into Oklahoma, and most of them to Oklahoma City. There was great optimism on the part of all citizens, and nearly everyone claimed to be a booster. If you were not a booster, you were a knocker and would be ostracized. Some enthusiasts claimed that Oklahoma City in a few years would have 25,000 population. Conservatives discounted this, but a few more enthusiastic boosters even predicted would have a population of 50,000. Seymor Heyman, who was very active in the Chamber of Commerce and ran a clothing store on Main Street, went out with the Chamber of Commerce excursions and made many booster talks. A few years later, a man from Elk City came into his store and said, "Mr. Heyman, I want to apologize to you. You were in Elk City a few years ago and bragged that Oklahoma City would someday have a population of 100,000. I made fun of you and I thought you were a dreamer and a hot air artist. But now I see you were right. You'll soon have 100,000, and I just want to apologize to you." Seymor Heyman put his hand on his shoulder, the man's shoulder, and said, "Don't you apologize to me. If I'd believed half of what I told you, I'd be a millionaire today." Henry Overholser was the outstanding town builder. He was the one responsible for getting the Frisco Railroad to build in Oklahoma City instead of in Guthrie. He campaigned for several years to get a water supply for the city because the city was getting its water from pipes driven into the gravel beds in the North Canadian River. After 3 different elections, bonds were finally voted for Lake Overholser, and we had a visible water supply. Henry insisted that we should have a state fair, and he bought 160 acres of school land on Eastern Avenue and built some buildings as a start for state fair. He wanted Klassen, who owned the street railway, to build a car line out to the fairgrounds. Klassen said he would not build it unless they would pave 8th Street so that he could put the car tracks on a paved street. Overholser tried to sign up property owners along 8th Street, but many refused. There were a good many vacant lots on the street, and Overholser bought them all up and got a majority of lots along 8th Street, signed the papers to have the paving charged to the property owners, and the paving of the street was built. The streetcar line was built. I.M. Putnam was a real estate developer and a great town booster. When Thomas E. Wilson came to town and had a secret meeting with leaders of the Chamber of Commerce, he offered to build a 3 million packing plant, provided a large tract of ground was made available and the citizens would pay a bonus of $300,000. John Chartel, who ran the street railway for Mr. Klassen, Sidney Brock, president of the Chamber of Commerce, and I were the committee to make a deal with Mr. Wilson. At 1 o'clock in the morning, after hours of negotiation, we signed a contract with Mr. Wilson that the citizens would pay a $300,000 bonus and the land for the packing house site would be bought or optioned. The deal was kept secret for several weeks until all the farmland needed was purchased or contracted for. The Chamber of Commerce called a meeting of citizens to raise the $300,000. I.M. Putnam was master of ceremonies. One citizen after another volunteered to pledge. And by the way, it was standing room only. You couldn't get up the stairs. There were so many people there. One citizen after another volunteered to pledge until finally $265,000 had been raised. When that point was reached, Putnam waved his hands in a grand manner and said, "I will take the rest." It had taken less than 2 hours to raise the $300,000. A year later, another packing company offered to build the 3 million packing plant and demanded $300,000 bonus. It took about 2 weeks to obtain pledges in that amount. Many individuals gave small sums, $100 or even less, but everyone wanted to participate. Such was the spirit of loyalty to Oklahoma City. When an initiative petition to move the capital from Guthrie to Oklahoma City was filed, Chamber of Commerce enlisted more than 200 speakers to go to towns throughout Oklahoma to plug for Oklahoma City as the capital. the chamber sent out 4 special trains in different directions, and many businessmen left their stores or places of business and joined in the campaign. Oklahoma City won the election by more than 50,000 votes. With many people, the growth and welfare of the city was paramount to their personal interests. In 1906, the famous Sarah Burnhardt, actress, was coming to put on a play in the Overholser Opera House. Our society editor suggested that we wire her an invitation for her and her company to attend a dinner after the show. She had turned down an invitation to such a dinner at the Union Mead Club in Chicago. I thought she would refuse, but we received a telegram in French accepting. It was then up to all the society people in Oklahoma City to rent white tails and ties for a grand dinner. The only place to hold it was in the Marquette Club on the top floor of the Empire Building. That was a 5-story building adjoining where the Criterion Theater was later built. Every seat in the Opera House was occupied and the whole play was in French, but everybody was thrilled by Bernhardt's magnificent voice and acting. Meals at the Marquette Club were normally 35 cents, but the price of this dinner was boosted to the unheard of price of $1.50. All of the elite of the town attended, but I imagine that Sarah Burnhardt was disappointed that guests were not in cowboy costume. In about 1905 or 6, the Oklahoma Cattlemen's Convention invited the Texas cattlemen to meet in joint session in Oklahoma City. A man named King was appointed a committee of 1 to prepare the entertainment. There were more than 1,000 cattlemen from Texas and from Oklahoma, and a dancer from Chicago was introduced as Queenie. There probably were 50 or more prominent Oklahoma City businessmen in attendance. Queenie began dancing and presently threw off a cape that she's wearing. A little later, she shed another garment, and the audience sensed what was coming, yelled, "Take 'em off! Take 'em off!" She dropped her skirt. In those days, they wore underskirts, too. She took off her waist. Finally, one by one, all of her garments, except the last. And they had to do a lot of yelling before she appeared absolutely nude. The news of Queenie's disgraceful disclosure spread like wildfire over all the city. Women whose husbands were not at home that night were demanding, "Were you there?" Some of the men, thinking discretion was the better part of valor, claimed they were playing poker with Bill Penny. Bill had calls from a lot of housewives asking if their husbands had been playing cards with him last night. Bill was equal to the occasion. "Why, yes, George was here." And another one that called, "Oh, yes, Roy was here. He was playing with us. Yeah, Jake was here." I think Bill alibied for at least 20 or 25 husbands who had gone to the entertainment without knowledge of the Queenie Act. One man who lived on East 10th Street, and I've forgotten his name, he was more candid than cautious. He went home when his wife it was late, of course, and his wife was asleep, so he did not disturb her. When he woke in the morning, he heard his wife in the kitchen and went out there and found her breaking some eggs to fry in the frying pan. He said, "Honey, last night I saw a lady take off her clothes, one garment at a time, her waist and her skirts and her corset and everything, and finally, when she dropped her drawers, there she was, naked as..." He never finished the sentence. His wife grabbed that pan of fried eggs and wham in his face. It seems that the wives of the Texas cattlemen were the most incensed. they laid down the law to their husband that never again will you go to Oklahoma City to a cattlemen's convention. That was more than 65 years ago, and the Texans haven't been back. But Queenie was a fighting word among housewives in Oklahoma City for many years. The great booster spirit of the early days continued on. The Oklahoma City Chamber of Commerce took up the challenge and led the way to more and greater achievements. It was Stanley Draper who developed the plan of asking citizens to underwrite projects of the Chamber of Commerce to develop new industries, to purchase land for the expansion of city institutions. For instance, about 15,000 acres of land was purchased around the Tinker area, including land for Draper Lake and the expansion of the city water system. Some of the underwriting money of the citizens was used also to buy a portion of the new lake site this side of Draper Lake, all of which was transferred to the city without profit. You're familiar with the story of how an Air Force captain and lieutenant from Washington came to the chamber and issued an ultimatum at 9 o'clock in the morning that many things must be provided by 4 o'clock that afternoon if the air material base was to be located here. They required that 40 miles of streets, 8 miles of 6-lane paving, 10 miles of water mains 24 inches in diameter, a gift of land, an option of still more land, and dozens of other requirements. They assumed it was impossible to fulfill their demands and bought tickets to go to Wichita, where they wanted to locate the air depot. Stanley Draper took charge. The State Highway Department, City Council, County Commissioners, and others were organized. The mayor and a guarantee to fulfill all demands was handed to the Air Force representatives at 4 o'clock. That's why we have Tinker Field. From then on, more than 1,000 citizens, time after time, signed notes, some of 100,000 or more, amounting over the years to over $40 million. And the money was used by the Chamber to develop not only Tinker Field, the Federal Aviation Center, Wholesale Manufacturing District, scores of other projects, but made Oklahoma City Metropolitan Center of 640,000. One important project was the purchase of many tracts of land around the site of Will Rogers Airport, and which was transferred to the Aviation Trust set up for the city. The purchase of land for the Western Electric Company resulted in new industry employing thousands of people. The land for the Federal Aviation Center was purchased and leased to the government, ensuring another very important source of employment. The notes of all these underwriters were cashed by the leading banks of the city, and the money made available for city projects. All of these notes have been paid off, and there's no further liability to the underwriters. No citizen ever lost any money on the credit which he loaned the Chamber of Commerce. I want to tell one more story before I end this talk. Dan Hogan used to have a bank in Yukon, but he moved to Oklahoma City and bought the Farmers Bank, corner of Brand and Robinson. Most bank accounts are very small, but one day a Greek who had a shoe shine parlor on Grand Avenue walked into the Farmers National Bank and pulled out $51,500 in cash to deposit. Dan was terribly excited, quizzed the Greek as to where he got this money, and did he make it out of his business? Yes, he'd saved it up, he said. Dan said, well, you ought to be a member of the Rotary Club. This shows what an American can do for a Greek immigrant who comes to this country and works hard and saves his money. I'm going to propose you as a member of the Rotary Club. The Greek was duly elected a member, inducted and instructed. He must always be loyal to Rotary, must always tell the truth, must always work for the benefit of his community, and so on, to which he agreed. After he was inducted, they asked him if he'd like to say a few words. He said yes, he's glad to be a member, but he promised to tell the truth, and he wanted to clear up a little misunderstanding. He said that $51,500 I deposited, the $1,500 was my money. I'd saved it. but the 50,000 belonged to my sister. That 50,000, my sister's money, and she runs a whorehouse. No doubt Rotary is very proud of their new members. I was asked to forecast something about the future of Oklahoma City, but I'm not a prophet nor a diviner. Some of you will remember that during the 1920s, the Chamber of Commerce in the city campaigned with the slogan, 200,000 in 1930. This is so well publicized that I received a letter from Seattle directed to E.K. Gaylord, 200,000 in 1930. No other address was given. The post office wouldn't do that now. In the census of 1930, we were nearly 15,000 short, as the population was given a little over 185,000. In the 50s, and again in the 50s, we campaigned for 600,000 in 1960 and offered $5,000 in prizes for the nearest guest to the actual population within a 30-mile radius of the state capitol building. Again, we fell short, as the census figures were a little over 535,000. It might be well to set a fairly easy goal of 800,080, where in the census of 1970, the metropolitan area was defined as the three counties, Oklahoma, Canadian, and Cleveland. This left out part of Oklahoma City, which is in Pottawatomie County, and another small population in McLean County. However, the total population for these three counties in 1970 was 640,889. And in the next 8 years, we would need to gain only 159,111 to make the goal of 800,000. Instead of being short of our goal, we might have some surplus over the 800,000. Population, however, is not our major goal. The quality of citizenship, the facilities and opportunities for education and culture should be and are our primary goals. Oklahoma City can be proud of its schools, its churches, its colleges and universities, its art center, its symphony, its Cowboy Hall of Fame, its Mummers Theater, the Frontiers of Science, the zoo, the planetarium, and scores of other organizations, institutions, which upgrade the quality of life in Oklahoma. I have confidence that the booster spirit still lives and that the people of Oklahoma City will continue to embrace these goals. Thank you.